Well, good afternoon, Dr. Coffman. How are you?
I am great. Good afternoon to you, Allison. How are you doing?
Good. You know what? I never officially gave you credit for the genius naming of this little episode that we've been doing, calling Dr. Kaufman, and every time I do it, I say to myself that I want to do like that old, whatever, 1950s version of like calling Dr. Kaufman, right? One of the old TV shows where someone must have said something over the loudspeaker. So, but I love it. And I love that I get this opportunity not only to connect with you personally and ask you the bazillion questions that I think up over the course of a few days, but I've gotten so much great and positive feedback from people, not just in Chattanooga, but really across the country. It could be the world. Who knows? Just saying they're so thankful for you, not just of your time, but your talents as a physician and as a parent, and willing to give us just what is we're finding very critical, but you know, candid advice in times where it's really hard to filter through the barrage of information out there and to understand what is accurate. So for all intents and purposes, you're my accurate source forever.
Thanks. Thanks for saying that. I mean, it's this week has been a hard week. I think I had a little bit of crisis of faith this week just because of I think a lot of things we're going to talk about today. It's been pretty harsh.
Yeah, yeah. But you look like you're doing a little bit of relaxation. I love the ambiance around you. That's not a fake Zoom background, to be clear, right? Yeah. A real live park. You're actually outside. I love
very
it.
social distance. There's no. There's no
That's brave, though. I would imagine as a popular pediatrician in Chattanooga, that if you go outside somewhere like that where it attracts, families normally, you run the risk of someone going, "Well, Dr. Kaufman, just a quick question," right?
Yes. Someone's going to break their arm here in a second. You guys are
right.
right.
I love it. Well, this has been, I can't even remember. I used to put the number of days in quarantine at the top of our screen. I've really lost count. Someone said it's only been 59 days or 62 days, whatever it is. It all sort of blends together. And I know one of the first things that I want to talk about, and I know a lot of people are anxious to talk about, is how do we stop talking about this, right? It's it's not just top of mind. It is top of every conversation, every Zoom meeting, every Corona cocktail virtual party that we have. We talk about it with our kids and our parents and our neighbors. And it's almost impossible to have a conversation not related to coronavirus because number one, we're just all consumed by it. But number two, it almost feels like you're not giving it the dignity it deserves, right? By talking about anything else. But please, can you give us permission and sort of the tools to use to talk about anything else, at least for a few minutes a day?
Yeah. Well, I think, and we've talked about it before, but it touches everything, and then I think as we get more comfortable and we start doing more things, we realize that we've even got to come back and think about coronavirus in light of this new thing that we're trying to do. I think, really doing that self-analysis about what do I need and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And I think, what I'm finding is everything takes a little bit longer now. I don't have the energy that I had before all this. I need to get more sleep. We often in our house we've kind of scheduled times to talk about it just so we know we're going to talk about it every once in a while, but we're not talking about it all the time. I think being purposeful about what you're doing with your entertainment. As a family, we watched a really dumb, predictable movie last night that was really funny, and it was it was nice. We really shut out all this that's going on. I think as we start to kind of pull more people into who we're interacting with regularly, making sure that we're kind of doing what we need to in regards to addressing the issues around coronavirus, but then living your life the rest of the time.
Yeah. And I know, look, we were lucky enough to have doctors Eckert are with us for the past few weeks, really talking about loss and grief and stress and anxiety and also addictive behaviors, right? Like, and I don't take for granted when, the two of us will often, say, well, did you have your glass of wine? Did you have your, glass of whiskey? Like, to unwind. I also want to be really respectful and cognizant of the fact that there are people who are struggling, right? And that this kind of quarantine, I would imagine, is not the ideal environment for them. Struggling with anything, right? Whether it be addiction, anxiety, grief. What advice do you have, especially for parents who are now in sort of overwork and overload mode right now, with little ones at home? They might be furloughed, or they might be working from home, single parent, or with a spouse that they're not used to working from home. It's a lot going at you at once.
Right.
How do they handle that? And also, how do you ask for help?
Yeah, and I think one, giving yourself credit for what you're doing.
Yeah.
If to have multiple kids who are under the age of 5 is a lot to do, and then I think you and I have both banged up against uh, teenagers and teenagers and young adults that want to go back to pretending nothing's going on, and they don't care about the consequences, and they're indestructible, and they really want to be with their friends, and they don't really think what we think is that important. And that's it is hard, and I think coronavirus has kind of proven to be this great magnifier, amplifier of
Mm.
the good in our lives. I think we've been able to see it, and it's been better. The people that are kind and good have really stepped up and done some amazing things. And I think the challenges that we have, whether it's a recent loss of a spouse, or recent divorce, sickness, personal problems. Those are all amplified by the stress we're seeing right now. And so, one, I think paying attention to yourself, but also paying attention to those people around you that may be struggling. I think part of the gratitude we've been trying to talk about in our family is that some of the things we're worrying about, that is pretty awesome, that's what we're worried about right now. And realizing as we talk about summer camps and gymnastics and sports teams and travel teams and college football. There's a lot of people who have to go to work, who work in places where they're in close quarters and they don't have adequate protection, and they come home to homes where there's multi generations living in pretty close quarters, and they don't have a choice about those things. And I think to really be aware of that, I think we know in our community specifically, there's a lot of disparity. There's a lot of social disparity. There's a lot of racial disparity. There's a lot of income disparity. There's a lot of access to health disparity, and all of this has amplified those things. And I think it's real easy to get tired and get pushed out to the fringes, where I'm going to lock myself away and pretend coronavirus is happening, or I'm going to go sit in the park with 200 people and not wear a mask and pretend that coronavirus is not happening. And that's, I think that's I would say, a lazy way to approach this, and probably not helpful as we go along. I think what I always tell people with parenting, I mean, the whole goal of being a parent is to be honest in your process of knowing who you are. And as you live every day that you're alive, you're finding new things about yourself, and you're finding out what's important to you. And as you raise a child, you're working to help that child know who they are, and figure out what's important to them, and then integrating that into a growing, maturing concept of what your family is. And that's hard anyway, because we live in a time where there's a lot of advances. And my parents didn't have to worry about cell phones and social media, and all the travel and technology. And as we get into this time of year, we're talking about people going off to college. We had one or two choices in regards to where you could go to college. It was
Right.
the state school, or the local community college, or maybe a private school that your parents went to. Now, if you want to go do a Spanish immersion oboe year abroad in Spain, you can do that. And so I think parenting is really hard. And then you add something like coronavirus, where now I'm having to figure out how this affects our lives, draw boundaries with my children that I never thought I would have to deal with, and that takes a ton of energy.
Yeah.
And I think, like we've talked about the last couple weeks, is just giving yourself a break. Like as you try new things, as you kind of figure out how we're going to live in these times, start slow, and when things don't work, back up and try again. And then I think if as you draw boundaries, give yourself credit for that, because I can tell you, in raising three teenagers, it gets hard. And I think we don't none of us know what to do. You can't call your parents and say, "How did you handle raising me during coronavirus?" Because it's we're all making this up as we go along.
Yeah.
And so I think it feeds in, what we're talking about today is just how do we manage those risks? How are you doing just with kind of your, I mean, do you find yourself getting angry as this keeps coming back up?
No, just more sort of frustrated by the lack of control, right? And I think I talk about this, right? I'm the type A who thinks she's a type B. It's the worst kind, right? I'm a firstborn child. I like to plan, right? Like I'm the planner for every family vacation, or even like just if we go to dinner, right? Like I just like to have order. I like spontaneity too, don't get me wrong.
Right, right,
But I like to know, right? Like with all the myriad of choices, I do a lot of research. And that's probably a professional habit too, right? As someone who interviews people for a living, I like to know what I'm getting into before I go there. I don't want to be surprised by something and regret anything because I didn't have information, right? And now it's just, I think like a lot of parents in a attempt to get as much information as possible, I'm so overwhelmed and
mm,
don't know who to listen to. And also, I'm trying not to let, as I could say, COVID rage take me over because it's very easy to do, right? Like to
right,
become judgy in situations like walking into a store and not seeing all of the employees or the patrons wearing masks, or
right,
on the road now. Like we haven't driven in so long. I drove to the grocery store the other day, and on the way back, I mean, there were crazy drivers. I know they were there before, but I'm screaming at them in my car, and I feel my blood pressure rising. And I know that's not. There's nothing against that one driver. It's me, right? I'm making all of those anxieties funnel into certain parts of my life where that I can control, I guess, right? And it is hard, right? It's so hard, right?
yeah.
I like to consider myself a pretty good mom, usually on a normal spectrum day. And in COVID times, I'm not ashamed to admit it. Like, it's really hard, and there's a lot of answers I don't have, especially what you talked about, right? I have three teenage boys, right? So, what's the right answer about allowing them to be with friends and spend the nights? And we've done, I think, a strategic and safe job of slowly expanding their social bubble. But, our middle son is turning 18 in 2 weeks. And
Mm.
I said, "Do you want to have friends over?" Right. And he even said, "No, because I can only have four. And who do I choose?" Right. So it becomes social anxiety for him too. How do we continue to allow them certain freedoms, right? And not inundate them with all these rules, but do it safely so that they're protecting themselves and us and the grandparents.
Well, one term I would share is something called abstinence fatigue.
Yeah.
One of person I really respect, Julia Marcus, who's a professor at Harvard in population health. She wrote a nice article in the Atlantic this week, just talking through everything that we've learned from when HIV first came out, and then with other sexually transmitted diseases and with pregnancy prevention. The temptation is to say we have to take the risk to zero, and so as we walk through, I think as you look at kind of what happens socially with HIV, it's a really good model in understanding how we want to approach things. And so the first effort when you don't know what's going on, and I think what we saw again with coronavirus 19 is when you don't know what the danger is, you really try to just shut it all down, and I think we
Mhm.
had to do that. And then as you go forward, that kind of just saying no to everything is not sustainable. We saw it with HIV in regards to when you said, okay, high risk groups can't do these things, and what happens is over time they actually end up going and doing worse stuff than they were before. It's kind of like when, I think I need to lose some weight, and I say, well, I'm going to do away with processed carbs, and then
Hmm.
2 days later, I find myself eating a family-sized bag of Lay's potato chips. Because it that you cannot approach these kind of things in that way. What as we learn more, and I think we're learning a lot very rapidly about coronavirus, and that's part of the stress I think we feel is that we're getting new information all the time. Um, we have to do a better job of deciding, what are the risks and what are the, what's high risk and what's low risk, and getting that information to people so that they can then kind of look at their lives and figure out, okay, here's what I need, and what are the risks. So, and some people can tolerate higher risks in their lives and some people can't. And so if you want to take it to zero, here's how you do it. If you want to get out and kind of, you need to do this thing because that's who part of who you are, here's a way you can do it, that's lower risk. Now that takes time and it takes patience and kindness and good communication.
Yeah.
I think, as we've talked through these things, a lot of people get very angry, and project all kinds of things, on as you kind of talk about this, and as I've done it as a physician, I've experienced a lot of that. As I've done it as an advocate for health, I've caught a lot of that. As I've done it as a parent, I've caught a lot of that. And I really try to come back and say, look, this is me. You know me, and here's where I am. I want to do this. I want to have this experience. I want to allow you to do this, but here's what I'm concerned about. And having those discussions about, what are the risks and how do we mitigate those risks as we go forward. I think, there's a lot of temptation to just sit in denial, and we can't do that. I mean, even in our own community in Chattanooga, we've seen we're yesterday we were at 206 active cases, and we've had 119 new cases just since we talked last on Wednesday. So we're at a rate now that's a lot more than we've ever been. And
Mm.
if you want to kind of get a sense of like what is the risk, you can take that active case rate. There's a lot of new work that's coming out looking at what is the incidence in the population. And if you look at your active case rate, which yesterday was 206, most of the studies right now are showing that the number of people in your community that are shedding coronavirus is probably about 40 to 100 times that. So in Chattanooga, that would be 8 to 20,000 people. That's about 2 to 5%. So right now in Chattanooga, if you're in a group of 50 people, the odds would say that at least one of those people is shedding coronavirus at this time. And so as you're thinking about what am I
And
doing?
could be asymptomatic, right? I mean,
Exactly. Most
doesn't
of
even
them
know they
are.
have it, right?
Right. That's exactly right. Or they just feel crappy and they think they've got allergies, and
Right.
that's what's going on. And so I think, as you think about, I go to Publix and I walk around and there's probably 100 people in the building, that the odds are a couple of those are shedding coronavirus. And so we have to, what we did with HIV is we, as a healthcare provider, we now assume we do universal precautions with every patient that we see. And I think we have to kind of take that approach right now as we're getting out and doing things. And so, as we pay attention to being in close quarters, as we pay attention to shared surfaces, and I think just thinking through some of those things, if you want to, we can kind of talk through just, what does that mean?
Yeah, I want to real quick because I feel like this is a really important question that we haven't addressed. But Kylie just wrote us and wanted to know, how do you recommend explaining to an autistic child about the virus and try to prevent the meltdowns that come with the change in their routine? And I think that's really important. I have many friends and relatives and children with special needs. That's another challenge with the coronavirus and everything that we're dealing with, right? With typically developing kids, it's exacerbated in those situations.
Right. Yeah, and I think, in working with a neuroatypical child, those parents know very well how much extra work that goes into things that you and I would take for granted. And I think this adds a whole nother wrinkle in regards to a lot of neuroatypical children can't tolerate masks. They can't tolerate their parents wearing masks. And so that may really limit what you can do and where you can go. Often changes in what we have to do to go do something will elicit a lot of repetitive comments and non sequitur, and so I have to hang out with people that are going to be kind and able to manage that as we go along. I think the approach that I try to take is really breaking it down into very black and white elements in regards to the child's ability to understand things, and then building new social stories around
Mhm.
how we have to do this, and now that whatever it is that you're adding or taking away, and often with children we can make up stories about it, we can make videos about it, you can do make a book and read that over and over again, make a poster board about the new schedule that we have to do in regards to those changes. I think it's hard because we're trying to figure out with neurotypical children, how we're going to do education. I have a child who has some learning challenges, and the homeschool worked because of a lot of effort, but his own individual uh, issues were not, you know, by the school system were not accounted for. And so I think, it's those those people that have neuroatypical children, we're going to see them thought about last as always, and that's not right. But and I think those of us who have friends or have family members that have neurotypical children or who are neuroatypical, that's a great opportunity to reach out and serve and to help take load off in other directions so that they have that energy and time to work on those things. That's a great point.
And also, I just want to point out, I mean, you talked about it before, right? Being in a crowded park without a mask. You showed the background before that you're pretty much the lone soldier in that park. But that it brings up a good point. Like, the most popular meme I'm seeing these days is the question, are you wearing a mask in public? And I have mine right here. This is my Tiger King mask, I call it, right? And I carry it around with me all the time. I'm sure you've got yours as well. Look at that. See? You're so thank goodness, because we did not prepare that. So, but I think people wonder, right? Like, I am not at a point where I feel like I can exercise wearing a mask out in public. Walking around, my husband and I did Enterprise South. We did the nature trails this morning, ran the trails. Are those safe habits? If you're sitting, for instance, I would take it as yes, right? In a park, you're by yourself and very well social distance from anybody. This is the best time for you to be maskless and to feel safe. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. So, what again? Wearing a mask for the most part, like typical cloth mask, like the one you have, is not to protect you. It is to protect other people. And so, if we're all wearing masks, and those of us who might have mild symptoms or don't have any symptoms, and we're shedding the virus, when we breathe, when we talk, when we yell, when we scream, when we sneeze, when we cough, the virus gets expelled into droplets and falls on things around us. We touch our face with our hands, and then we can't shake hands or give hugs. We spread it that way, and so wearing the mask helps protect what's around you from you. I think it's impossible to do aerobic activity with a mask, and so I walk in my neighborhood. I carry my mask with me if in case someone wants to come up and talk, which happens a lot. And so I don't wear it when I'm walking through my neighborhood. I think in this kind of, like, when I'm out in the middle of a field, I have it with me in case something pops up. But I'm not wearing it when I'm walking around.
Yeah.
When you're in a space that's shared by people, or a space that's inside grocery store, school, church, those kind of places, it's important to wear it all the time. I've just gotten in the habit of I keep mine on a lot, just because I wear a mask all the time. I wear it at work, and we drove with a friend of we have one of my daughter's friends who her father's a physician, and they're doing really good social distancing, and so she and my daughter have done a lot together. But we wear a mask around her, and she wears a mask when she's with my daughter. And all of that has to do with us, kind of with what our tolerable level of risk is. I think, as you think about that, being in close places, being around a lot of other people, being in extended close contact, so less than 6 feet for more than 10 minutes, those are all things that are going to increase your risk of being exposed. Being outside, being with the same people. So if you had a friend who you really like to run with, you all going and spending time together, and that's the only person you're running with, that's much lower risk than my running club that has 120 people in it, and 10 different people show up every other day and we run together. That's a much higher risk engagement. And so I think as we kind of figure out what do we need to do, it really is kind of what are the more risky things. And you and your husband going for a walk without a mask on, and not seeing anybody, and talking and enjoying fresh air, it's a very low risk activity.
And right. And it's all about putting it into a perspective of it's not just about me, right? I'm constantly worried about protecting others, and not that I think I have the disease. But as you said, if you're asymptomatic, you don't know. Which brings up Denise's question, which I'm reluctant to ask, but also very curious to know the answer to. In your opinion, how long do you think this is going to last?
I'm trying to be
That's
positive
a
today.
$1 million question. I know. I know.
Yeah. Well, I
Maybe
think,
some hope in there. So
yeah, so I think we are seeing there's some good data that nationally hospitalization rates are really starting to go down. We've had 2 weeks where that trend seems to be down. I think locally in Hamilton County we're seeing the rates go up, as well as the hospitalized rates are staying pretty high. There's been some reporting that that's because testing is going up. It's hard to get that data, the number of tests, but the different ways I've kind of gotten a peek into that, I don't get a sense that the testing number is going up. And so I think it's a little concerning that our case rate is also going up. I think we're going to see, if things kind of stay like they are right now, um, I think what we're going to see is just these little episodic outbreaks where one person, at the Coke chicken plant gets 11 other people sick, and then they go home and get 30 other people, family members sick. We're just going to have that kind of popping up, I think, for a while. We don't know what the heat of the summer is going to do to the virus, but in pandemics, if it stays at a high level, the normal climate changes of a virus tend to not be affected very much. And then I think as we look, the big question now is going to be school and then large sports gatherings. As we get back into those things, those are going to be super spreader kind of events. I think there's a lot of weddings and things that have been postponed, a lot of meetings, national meetings that have been postponed. And as people start getting tired of all this, and willing to take more risk, that's really going to kind of show us what it's going to do. I think we talked about a couple weeks ago, the treatments are going to get better. I think definitely within the next year we'll do better. I think you've seen just locally, the local hospitals are getting better at managing complications. I don't want anyone to think, so a person that is in the hospital with coronavirus or a person that's in the ICU and survives, those people do not return to normal. Those people are sick for a very long time. Lung function, sometimes cardiac function, is affected for weeks to months. Folks that are in the ICU and get intubated have cognitive loss. So even though, because I've had a lot of people say, like, we've only had 13 deaths for a long time in Chattanooga, we've had a lot of people in the ICU, and those people are not, are really, it's hard. So I don't want to trivialize that piece of it. And I think, something you said earlier, I think it's very important. Shaming is not helpful. I think it's an easy place to go. And so you see people that aren't doing what I think they need to do. And we've heard a lot with social media in regards to that lately. But shaming, what it tends to do is it drives people to extremes. So they don't listen anymore. And people that are maybe doing too much and hurting themselves or others, people that aren't doing anything and are hurting themselves and others, then go into hiding. And so I think to have that discussion about the nuance of all this, to help people really understand the risks, and to live better lives, I think that is dependent on all of us being kind and talking and communicating well.
I know I said to my friend today, I said, remember when we got annoyed when they first started coming out with no peanut butter in elementary school? And we'd be like, what are we going to pack? I'm like, I was such a spoiled brat, right? Like,
Yeah,
please, I won't ever pack a peanut butter sandwich ever. I won't bring it on an airplane. Like, let's go back. That was a simpler time, right? Where
right,
that was our
exactly.
biggest concern,
Yeah,
right? I'm
yeah.
inconvenienced because I can't have peanut butter crackers in second grade, right? And speaking of second grade, and I know I'm jumping around, but I've had a few people who have sent us messages on Facebook about this summer in sports, right? They're wanting to know for their kids specifically, right? We know a lot of camps have been canceled. We know some of our local attractions are starting to open at a smaller capacity. What about, baseball? What about indoor gymnastics? What about, anything else that might have some sort of team element, or a smaller group of people where they can, minimize the social interaction?
Right.
What are the kind of the safety, spectrum in terms of those options?
Yeah, so indoor versus outdoor. Indoor is a lot higher risk than outdoor activities. Indoor activities where things are really well ventilated. So, a gym that has, high flow, lots of fans, that will decrease the risk. Sports where the equipment is shared. So, like with basketball, where you're playing with the same ball is higher risk. Gymnastics, where you have shared equipment, is higher risk. And so the nice thing with gymnastics is you don't have two people on the same equipment. So in between uses, being purposeful about cleaning that and using hand sanitizer, making sure that the gym, if what you're doing is in a gym, making sure that they have adequate cleaning protocols and that they're doing the right things. Be careful they're not overdoing it, so that now everybody's having skin reactions. We've been seeing a lot of rash just from everybody being diligent with cleaning in our office. I think when you look at kind of what's going on in between activities, if when you're not doing aerobic activity or when you're not tumbling, doing gymnastics, staying masked is helpful. That's hard, and I get it. But when the soccer team or lacrosse team or softball teams on the sidelines, they should be wearing masks and they should be socially distant. So making sure that's spread out. I've seen several teams that have had space marked for kids to keep their equipment. So you bring your bag, you bring your bat, your lacrosse stick, your soccer ball bag, and that all goes in your spot. Hydration is a risk. So as you look at like shared hydration, making sure that everybody has their own elements. And then I think another thing to think about is when it's possible to really keep the same groups together. So like in softball, that the outfielders all work out together, the infielders all work out together. You have 3 or 4 people that are in contact, and we're not mixing as much as we can. I know my daughter plays lacrosse, and when they work out, they're doing it in very small groups, and then uh, when they're doing drills, making sure that they're staying socially isolated. When you're doing aerobic activity, when you're yelling, uh, th- all of that is going to increase the amount of shedding that you're doing. There was a study from Belgium where they looked at track runners and their droplet production, and behind the runners, they were shedding droplets up to 30, 40 feet. So,
Oh,
it's,
great. And I ran
yeah,
right behind my husband today. Forget, I'm not worried about getting sick, just the sweat. Gross.
there you go. Yeah. But I think any as you approach it, I'm looking for those things. The other thing that you and I have been hearing a lot about is camps,
Yeah.
and I think as you look at camp opportunities, the scaling back of the number of people that are going to be at a camp, so having the cabin be full with 30 campers that are going to be hanging out together, that's higher risk. Cutting it to a number. What I've been telling people is when you're looking at children's activities, you want to make sure that the number of kids that are being assigned to their either counselors or camp leaders are enough that they can actually manage that group. So if it's a camp of third graders, it's hard. Even if we're only putting 6 kids in a cabin, um, as soon as they leave the cabin wanting to mix with everybody else, that takes a lot of manpower. And so making sure that the number of people versus the number of staff members is appropriate. Again, shared spaces that we're limiting those. A lot of camps are talking about like having a family style camp where smaller kids, smaller number in the cabins, and then the cabins move together to do activities, and so they're not mixing with other kids in the camp. They're not eating together. They're eating individually prepared meals. They're not sharing utensils. And then just the cleaning regiments as we move in between those things. Those are all things that you want to be paying attention to as you try to find things for your kids to do during the summer.
All right. Look, I know we had like 100 other things we thought we might be able to discuss today. We always overshoot, right? The good news is we'll be back together on Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern, and we'll continue this conversation. For those of you, if we didn't get to your questions today, we will record them and get back to them on Wednesday, if not another day. And we appreciate watching. Look, I think the takeaways today are very simple. I'm going to call them the 3 M's, right? When we're deciding things for us or our children, our families, we need to measure the risk. We need to minimize exposure. And as always, we have to make the best choices that we can with the information that we have. Is that a pretty good summation,
That's
Dr.
perfect.
Coffman?
That's perfect.
And I'll end. We like to end on a hopeful note. I saw one of my favorite memes this week was someone said, "Remind me again how Bill Murray finally turned the day over in that movie Groundhog Day. Like, what did he finally do to stop living the same day over and over?" And someone responded, "Don't you remember when he realized it wasn't about him and it was about how he could make other people happy? His day was finally over and his life was able to continue." And I think
Good.
if that this has taught us nothing else, it is this we over me, that hashtag, and also this idea that you keep sharing with me that lowers my blood pressure every time we speak, which is to give ourselves and each other the grace that we deserve and the gratitude that we need always. And to you, I thank you for that, Dr. Kaufman.
Yes, and thank you for your encouragement. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, enjoy the rest of that beautiful day. I can hear the birds
Yeah.
chirping in the distance, beckoning you to get off the phone
I'll
and
go
go
for a
enjoy
long walk.
nature. Go for a long walk, but not behind anybody, especially not a
That's
runner.
right. All by myself.
And I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
All right. We'll see you then, Allison. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dr. Kaufman. You too.